Age of Mythology is a game, a very good game in fact, where the leading cause of death isn't getting shot by arrows or stabbed with a spear, but simply upsetting the gods. So it is by any means very realistic. It was made by the late Ensemble Studios as a spin-off of Age of Empires. So that means collect wood, gold and food, build up your base, produce units, get population cap, and attack the enemy. It's quite a nostalgic game for me and a lot of other people, so let's dig into it. Let's start with the gameplay. The gameplay is very close to that of Age of Empires. The biggest differences are that the different factions have a more distinct playstyle, but we'll get into that later. The typical unit counters are still here, such as spearmen countering cavalry. However, now there are three new broader unit types: human units, hero units, and myth units. Hero units are very different depending on the faction you play. The Greeks have heroes of ancient tales like Perseus or Ajax. The Egyptians have priests and pharaohs. But then there are the Norse, who just have some guys with hammers. They do increase damage to myth units, so they counter them pretty well. However, they are usually not cost effective against human units. The myth units allow for a lot of variety and are overall pretty cool. Most of them have some sort of special attack, like turning people into stone, a jump attack, or throwing someone, or throwing someone, or throwing someone, or even throwing someone. They also look very cool. They counter the human units, and some of my favorites include the Colossus that eat trees and coal mines to regain HP, the Hydra that grows more heads when it kills units, or the automatons that can repair one another and even rebuild fallen ones.
Greasy cocks and lubed up buttholes. That's what my garage is all about.
Myth units, along with some techs, cost favor, a new resource. Every faction collects favor differently, but we'll get into that later. Another difference from Age of Empires is that you can only build your town centers on predetermined places. This means that map control is much more important, and it forces people to expand a bit further instead of turtling in a small area. Whenever you age up, you have to choose from two minor gods. This will determine what upgrades and units you get, which determines your strategy. It also determines what god powers you get, so let's get into those. Start a forest fire to get into your enemy's base. Turn your enemies into pigs and eat them. An eclipse to increase the power of your myth units.
You merely adopted the dark. I was born in it, molded by it.
Or even the nuclear option.
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
There's a lot of variety. Some improve your economy, some are defensive, and others are offensive. A big part of high-level play is saving them for just the right moment and trying to bait your opponent into using them. There's nothing worse than trying to land the killing blow to your enemy's base and him aging up just before you arrive and just deleting half your army with a lightning storm. They all look and sound great, which adds to the bravado when you use them. Let's get into the campaign. The campaign is pretty good. There's a lot of variety. Sometimes you have to attack, sometimes you defend, sometimes you attack and defend at the same time. There are some missions where you have to build up two camps at once. You have a lot of options. Do you build two bases and armies and push from both sides, or do you cut the tree line to combine the bases? Here is where the god bars also come into their element. Do you use underground to combine the bases easily, or simply break the game? The choices are endless. There are also quite a few levels where exploration is important, or with unique objectives. This all helps to keep the campaign fresh and replayable. The story is about Arkantos, a general of Atlantis that starts out fighting some pirates, but eventually gets tangled up in a plot of a Cyclops that serves a god who is trying to overtake Zeus. It takes him from Atlantis to Greece to Egypt to Scandinavia, and even to the underworld. Let's just say there's a lot of artistic freedom taken when it comes to the myths. What is pretty neat is that every level starts and ends with a cutscene. These can range from pretty good...
Where to now, Arkantos?
Back to Atlantis. This was a welcome break from chasing pirates, but I need to return home.
Well, pirates or not, you need to get your boats repaired.
You don't think they can make it to Atlantis?
No.
Too less so.
The Atlanteans, sir. They invaded the island.
What?
They were building a temple to Uranus. They attacked the colony.
I don't believe it.
Overall, the campaign is pretty great and quite replayable. The game was quite successful when it came out, so they made an expansion called the Titans. The Titans expansion came out almost a year later. It added the Atlantean faction and the campaign. It also added Titans for every faction, a huge and expensive unit with tons of health and damage. The only way to beat them is to spam hero units or to get your own Titan, otherwise you're kinda fucked. So anytime you hear this sound, you'll get a small heart attack. You first need to research the tech, and then build the gate, which takes a long ass time. Your enemy will see where you place the gate, so be sure to protect it well, because if he destroys it, then there's a good chance you can't bounce back economically. The new campaign is also pretty good. There's also almost no normal level. They all have unique objectives or unique ways to accomplish them. It's also somewhat a continuation of the main campaign's story, as you play as a son of Arkantos. The plot is almost exactly the same as the main campaign. However, this time there's giant titans everywhere that you need to stop. The Atlantean faction is also very unique and fun to play. There are 5 factions, and they all have a very different playstyle from each other. Each faction has 3 major gods, which decide what god powers you start out with and some civ bonuses. It also decides which minor gods you can choose from when you age up. The Greek faction is the most similar to the Age of Empires 2 factions, so if you come from that game, this is a good place to start. Having said that, they're quite the fun faction to play with, as they have strong myth and hero units. They collect favor by praying to their gods at the temple. Then there are the Egyptians.
We was kings and shit, niggas, I swear to God, man, I'm my fucking family member. We from Egypt, nigga. I was an ancestor of Egypt, man. And you telling me that them Egyptians over there ain't black? Look at their skin, man, they black, man.
We're all about the endgame with their powerful elephant and chariot units. They need gold for a lot of their buildings and units instead of food or wood. They have a pharaoh that is able to empower buildings, making them work more efficiently. Their myth units are overall less powerful but cheaper to get, and they collect favor by constructing monuments. The Norse are the most interesting faction. Their infantry construct buildings instead of villagers. This means that they're quite good at building foreign buildings and even taking over enemy bases and building their own there. Their villagers can only collect resources and drop these off at movable ox carts. They also generate favor through battle, so overall this is the most offensively geared faction. The Atlanteans can turn almost any human unit into heroes. This means you should never attack them with myth units, because even their fucking villagers can kill them. They have a very unique aesthetic, a somewhat industrial look, which somehow doesn't look out of place with the more classical buildings of the other factions. Their villagers don't need drop-off points to collect resources, and are overall more efficient but more expensive. They collect favor by building town centers, so it is even more important for them to spread out and claim as many settlements as possible. Then there's the Chinese faction, added by the horrendous Tale of the Dragon DLC, which is a glitchy, broken mess. I mean, the best faction and campaign in the whole game. They're overall quite the generic faction, however they can build gardens which generate a resource you select. Since they don't take up a population spot, it can get out of hand quite fast. It is also through these gardens that they generate favor. They used to be utterly overpowered, but have been nerfed quite a bit. We can't avoid talking about this, can we? So this is a DLC added in 2016, adding the Chinese faction and a new campaign. The campaign is just a mess. Cutscenes look awful and oftentimes glitch out. The audio mixing is terrible, so sometimes you can't even hear people speak. Not like you want to hear them speak, because even the voice acting is terrible. The levels themselves are not that fun to play because they're boring and sometimes way too difficult. They also have a tendency to glitch out and for triggers to stop working. It's quite hard to think of any fun part of the campaign. The story itself is confusing and half the time I have no idea what's going on, but I don't really care. Well, onto the presentation. You may have noticed, it's 3D. Ensemble's first 3D game, in fact. When it came out, it was one of the best looking RTS games, and to this day, some things hold up. The landscape and environments still look great and detailed. However, the units have a low poly blocky feel to them, so you'd best not zoom in too much. Another part of the presentation that they knocked out of the park was the soundtrack. You've been listening to it in the background throughout this video, but let's take some time to really appreciate it. Now that's what you call an amazing soundtrack. Another nice thing about this game is that it includes a level editor. It's quite deep and you can make some pretty cool levels using it, but because I'm a mentally challenged monkey I can barely use it. There's also Steam Workshop support, so there's quite a few good mods to pick up, however nothing too major. At last, I'd like to shine a light to some of the Age of Mythology YouTubers. AOM Visions makes some really beautiful cutscenes using the editor, and Bold TV is a good place to look at some high level play or even casted tournaments from back in the day.